This is lesson 10 for church leadership and administration for the Jamaica School of Preaching. This particular class will be discussing guidelines for a good discussion. There are several that are listed in the material that will be sent to the students. And one of the things that's helpful to us, if we're going to have discussions, it could be a discussion between the preacher and a church member. It could be a discussion between the preacher and a group of people. It could be used for the meetings of the church with the men to have some kind of guidelines for how they're going to handle their discussions. These rules also can be changed to fit different situations. Not everything in these rules fits every situation. So bear in mind that using these can be altered some, but there are some things that are in these discussion rules that should be unalterable, that should not change. And in quite often when discussions are held, there really are no rules. And what happens when there are no rules or there are no guidelines? There's confusion and there's not an order to the way things are done. And it's important as we have communication with one another in the church in various meetings, various situations, that we have some kind of guidelines. Now, some may take these guidelines that I'm sending and alter them in several ways, but these were originally put together by a brother in Christ by the name of Jerrie Barber. And I am following basically the same format that he used in giving these guidelines as I sat through some of his classes. Now, one of the important things about having a group discussion, whether it's a group of 2, a group of 10, or a group of 5, or maybe the entire church, is coming to some terms of agreement. Depending on the translation that you use, Amos 3 and verse 3 asks the question, can 2 walk together unless they are agreed? Some translations imply that that is an appointment to be kept. Can 2 have an appointment unless they have agreed to have the appointment? But either way, we understand that there are certain things that have to happen in order to have a good discussion. And one of them is we have to come to terms of agreement. Now, one of the things that may start off, let's say it's a counseling session, or maybe it's the men meeting together and the preacher is trying to help the church get organized, or maybe it's just a group setting where you feel like there could be the possibility of some lack of order. The first question that is in our list is, may I be the leader of this group? And you ask the entire group and you write down their answers. They have a copy of the rules and they put their name on there and they will put down yes or no as to whether or not they agree that you can be the leader. And when it comes to discussing, well, who's in charge, everybody has already agreed that whoever establishes the meeting, they are in charge of it. Somebody has to have the responsibility to keep things going in a certain way. Another important question is, if a time would be set, let's say that you're going to have a counseling session, or you're going to have a meeting of the men, or some other kind of meeting. Okay, you've decided on a certain time. Maybe it's Friday evening at 7 o'clock. Or maybe with the meeting of the men, you may have to meet on Sunday afternoon. Okay, we're going to meet at Sunday afternoon and we're going to set at a certain time. So once the time is set, then you decide, okay, how long are we going to meet for? We're going to meet for an hour. We're going to meet for 45 minutes. Are we going to meet for 30 minutes? Or do we want to give ourselves more time? And what you're doing, you're helping set some boundaries to help people understand the importance of being organized and functional. So the first question is, may I be the leader of the group? The second question is, will we start on time? So we set a certain time. You ask the group, okay, if we're going to meet at 7 o'clock on Thursdays or a certain time on Sunday afternoon, will we start at that time? And I think you also need to ask the question, okay, if we set a time at, let's say, 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon for the men to meet, and everybody agrees we'll start on time, and somebody is late, then they need to realize that the meeting's going to go ahead and start without them because they agreed to start on time. This is a part of learning leadership. It's a part of learning responsibility. And now somebody might call and say, look, I'm going to be 5 minutes late and let you know, but most people may not do that. But you've got to have some kind of organization. And it's important when they agree to start on time, and let's say you're going to meet for an hour or whatever your time limit is, will we quit on time? What happens here? Well, because a lot of times you'll have a meeting and say it's set at a certain time and say, okay, we're going to meet at 2 o'clock and we're going to be done by 3 o'clock or 3:30, whatever time you set, or 7 in the evenings, maybe an hour is long enough. It probably usually is, unless you have a serious issue to deal with. So, okay, tonight we're not going to have a quitting time because we have something serious to talk about. But typically they agree. See, everybody has a copy of the rules, and so they agree to it. Then another important thing comes from when we speak. And the leader of the group, if it's the preacher or someone else, he will initiate the meeting. And it's also important when you set these guidelines. Okay, are we going to take notes? And who's going to take the notes? And then when we get through with the meeting, what are we going to do with those notes? Are we going to keep them in a book somewhere? Let's say it's the men's meeting and you're keeping minutes for the meeting. Then, okay, brother so-and-so will keep the minutes, okay? And in the course of time, you help him say, okay, did you get what we said right there? But now, talking about communicating, one of the things that is really frustrating in any kind of a meeting is when more than one person is talking at a time. And I've seen it in Bible classes. I've seen it in men's meetings and other situations while I'm trying to speak, or maybe someone else is leading the group and there are people over here in the back and they're talking. Well, one thing for certain, if they're in the back and they're talking, they're not listening. If they are listening, they're listening to one another. And what they're doing is also disruptive. It's also disrespectful to the leader of the group. There's a principle for this in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 27 through 33. This is a meeting of the church in Corinth, and Paul is talking about how they would meet. It's not a perfect parallel to maybe what you would do like in a men's meeting or even a group of 3 or even a group of 2 if you're having a counseling session with a husband and wife, or some other setting, or whatever the meeting is, or even a Bible class. Now, in verse 27 of 1 Corinthians 14, Paul says, if anyone speaks in a tongue, it should be by 1 or 2, at the most 3, and each in turn, and one must interpret. Now, we're not talking about speaking in tongues here. We're talking about the rules for speaking in the assembly. Then he says, but if there's no interpreter, he must keep silent in the church and let him speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak. Now, let's just move this to our day and time. And maybe more than one person wants to speak. I'm not talking about prophecy or meeting of the church just a meeting of any kind. And so there's a rule here, there's a principle here for this rule. Let verse 29, let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let the others pass judgment. But if a revelation is made to another, he who is seated, the first one must keep silent. For you can, in verse 31 is our key for the principle for what we're talking about. We're not talking about prophecy. We're not talking about speaking in tongues. We're talking about rules of communication in a group setting. Verse 31, for you can all prophesy one by one. In a group meeting, people can speak one by one or one at a time, so that all may learn and all may be exhorted or edified. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. I understand the setting that Paul is explaining here, but there's a principle. I'm speaking and I'm trying to explain something, or I'm asking a question, and somebody in the back or over to the side, they start talking, and we're talking at the same time. I have never been in a setting where that's going on and there's clear communication. What did he say? I don't know. So-and-so was talking. Or I was, so you understand the importance of speaking one at a time. You'll understand this in Bible classes, in marriage. If you're having a discussion, these are good rules to even have in marriage. If you're having a discussion, okay, you speak, I speak. And we don't speak at the same time. It is a biblical principle. This is why in the church, in churches that have several people talking at one time, what do you have? Confusion. What do you have in a meeting where more than one person is speaking at a time? Here's the question. Are we agreeing to have a rule that we will speak one person at a time? And then the people have a copy of the rules and they put yes. And I can't imagine why anybody would want to disagree with that. Now the fifth question is, will we talk where others can hear, or will we speak softly in small groups where others will not know what is being said? In other words, if you're speaking, raise your voice loud enough to be heard so that it is clear, not that you're not off over here or over here talking together. Will we agree that we will speak so other people can hear what we're saying or the question that we're asking? We're talking about good communication here. I don't know what you say and you don't know what I say if we can't hear one another. So that's the fifth rule. And you'll have copies of these to discuss them. Number 6, will each person speak for himself or herself, or will we speak for others, such as they, them, everybody, and for God as well? In other words, when we're talking, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not going to speak for you. I don't even know what you're thinking. And it's not my place to speak for somebody else, but to speak for myself. And not talking about, well, they said, she said. We speak for ourselves. If somebody else has said something that needs to be communicated to the group, then let that person speak if they are so inclined to do so, if they want to speak. It's important to study these rules and understand them yourself before you try to implement them in a group setting. And certainly none of us can speak for God. It's like, well, I was talking, just for an example, some months ago, I was talking with a person trying to instruct this person in the scriptures. My wife was with me, and we looked at a text that was very clear as what was being said. And it was contrary to an activity that this person was involved in. And we looked at what Jesus said. It was talking about marriage and divorce. And I said, we read that and talked about it. And I said, well, what do you think about that? She says, well, I just think Jesus wants me to be happy. And I thought, that's not what the text says. The point is, she's speaking for Jesus when Jesus has already spoken. I'm not going to speak for you or you speak for me. Let's speak for ourselves, because sometimes we do that in a group setting and we think, well, I know what you're thinking. Well, you really don't know what I'm thinking unless I tell you. And that can cause confusion. It can cause anger and bitterness too. Try to speak for somebody else. Now, number 7, will we have a right to all our feelings, the painful as well as the pleasant? My feelings are just as important as yours, and your feelings are just as important as mine. And I might express something that is emotional, that's personal, and somebody said, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Well, will we make a rule that we have a right to feel what we feel? Now, these can come out in marriage discussions. They can come out in group settings of the church, sometimes in men's meetings, and so my feelings are my friends. I'm glad God gives us the ability to feel sad when we're sad. Anger is not bad unless it causes us to sin. And yet, if I'm angry with somebody, I may need to say, that really upsets me. Will we love each other enough to know if I upset you or you upset me in a meeting, that I say, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to come across that way, or I said it wrong. Will we be responsible for what we say? That's an important thing. And you think these kind of rules are not necessary till you try to have meetings without some kind of guidelines, and you'll find out that you really do need them. Now, so, and then let's kind of think about this number 7. Will we have the right to our feelings, the painful as well as the pleasant? Some things make people real happy. In Romans 15, Paul says to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And so there are times when people are happy, times when they're sad. There may be someone come to a meeting and they're just having a hard time and they want to talk to the group about it. It could be in a men's meeting. It could be in a marriage discussion, counseling session. I said Romans 15, Romans 12:15. Paul said, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. So if you're sad, I need to try to be sad with you and realize that you're legitimately having a hard time. I should be happy if you're happy about something. We should love each other in the church, in all these, any kind of meetings that we have. Our feelings are, Paul tells us, people have the right to their feelings. And so we need to recognize that. And somebody is happy about something, then rejoice with them. If they're sad, I'm sorry you're going through that. Now, number 8, do you want to have a rule that will not make fun of what people say in the group? Sometimes people will say things and other people will laugh about it. Well, how do we feel? What about the golden rule in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, to treat others the way you want to be treated? Do you want people laughing at you? Then we shouldn't, naturally the answer that's no, unless it's something very humorous. But to make fun of someone, that's not humorous. That can be very hurtful, and it can cause them not to want to be a part of the meeting. It can cause people not to want to be a part of the congregation. We don't want to make fun of people. Have to be very careful with that. Some people say, well, things like that they don't bother me. Some people say, boy, they bother me. We need to be respectful of people's feelings. And are we going to have a rule that we won't make fun of people? And if it comes up that somebody does, say, wait a minute, I think we have a rule about that. or 2 or 3 people are talking at one time, and the next point is one that where the leader may have to step in. Number 9, may I as a leader have a right to interrupt? I'm leading the meeting, and you've given me, number 1, permission to be the leader of the meeting. And so you can't go back on that rule. And I may be trying to accomplish something that we're trying to get done. And so do I have the right to interrupt without being rude? It's okay. Let's move on to the next point. And I want to talk more about that too, like on a little bit of a different point on how to divide up the different works of the church and get people involved and set up some committees. And so in those kind of meetings, you would want to keep things moving. In a counseling session with a husband and wife, and I say, well, all right, let's stop for a minute here, because I'm not sure I understood what you just said, and I want to be clear. Would you please repeat that? And in the marriage situation, it come up, well, the husband and wife makes fun of the other. Well, you've already made a rule, you're not going to do that. But as the leader, you have the right to interrupt because you want to keep things going and flowing. And you ask the group, will you give me permission to interrupt if I think it's necessary? And if they say yes, it's okay. If it ever comes up, okay, you told me I could do that. Now, number 10, will we have the right to disagree with each other? Even sometimes on biblical things. Do we have the right to disagree? Yes. We may want to get into a deeper discussion somewhere about something doctrinal, but if we're talking about just general things, the point is, do we have the right to disagree? One of the ways that we can settle issues with one another is, I don't agree with what you said. Okay, why don't you agree with it? Well, if you'll give me a moment, I'll explain that. And it could be that you misunderstood what somebody said, or you very clearly understood what they were saying. Disagreements can be good in that that's how you kind of work things out. Just for example, you're going to you're bringing up some key discussion point. Let's say you're changing the times of the meeting of the church. And sometimes that happens. It's probably not a good idea to do it very often, but sometimes it's necessary for various reasons. And so let's say, okay, we're going to have the meeting at this time. The church will meet at whatever time Sunday morning, whatever time Sunday evening. And somebody says, well, I don't know that that's a good time. Okay, why? In other words, you're having a disagreement. It's not a heated disagreement, but you're trying to come to some conclusions about things, or maybe in a marriage counseling situation. I don't agree with what my wife is saying about me, or I don't agree with what my husband is saying about me. And that's where you kind of, okay, what's the issue here? It's disagreements help people come to better understandings and kind of clear things up. And there could be no disagreement at all, but if you don't talk about it, you can't work it out. Now, another very important point, and this is in counseling, especially in husband and wife counseling, or if there's something being talked about among the men of the church and it doesn't need to go anywhere, it needs to stay in here. What you say here stays here. Maybe something you're trying to work out. Maybe it's a disciplinary issue with some brother that, okay, we're not going to go out here and talk about him. We know he's got a problem, or a sister. We want to try to help them, but we don't need to go out here talking to everybody about it, or go out and the wife will say, well, yeah, we had a counseling session, and I'll tell you what, let me tell you what my husband said. Or let me tell you what my wife said the husband says. And sometimes a wife, more often than not, will come to me, say, well, my husband and I are having marital problems. Okay, when are you two going to come and see me? Well, he won't come. Well, I really don't want to meet with just one party. I want to meet with both, because they're going to come to me and say, my husband is doing this. My husband said that. Now I'm thinking maybe a life-threatening situation. Maybe you might handle that a little differently if they're fearful of their lives. But typically it's like we're having some issues, and I would like to talk to you, and it's okay. Maybe they're asking for advice in how to handle something, but you've got to be a good listener and a good observer. Is this person telling you something that you really need the husband and the wife together to talk about it? More often that's the case than not, because you're only going to get one side of the issue, and you're not going to get all of it. And you may not be getting it just exactly the way it is. People have the tendency to lean toward their perspective, and they don't want to see somebody else's perspective. And so it's important. But will we settle group business? This is number 11. Will we settle group business in the group? Or will we get in small groups afterward and talk about each other? Now, this is a broad statement. But in other words, okay, we're settling something here, husband and wife, or maybe you're discussing something of a sensitive nature among the men, or you may just be having a one-on-one counseling session with somebody, and it doesn't have anything to do with their spouse or their girlfriend. It's a personal issue. And, we're going to keep that information here. And one of the things I tell people in counseling, anything you tell me, unless you're thinking about committing suicide, and in the United States, if they tell you that, you are required by law to report it. That's the law, because if they do it and you knew about it, you didn't stop it, that could put you in jail. I don't know about Jamaica and other places, but typically the things that people tell us in one-on-one, or the two of us or a group, can be sensitive in nature. That needs to stay in here. Or maybe the men are trying to work something out and they haven't reached a conclusion on something that the church is going to do. Okay, until we get this clear, we don't need to go tell anybody what we talked about in here till we come to a conclusion. And then, okay, we're going to tell the church what our plans are. But right now you go out and start talking and it causes confusion. But another thing too, there's a principle in Matthew 18 and verse 15. If your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. Let's say something happens in a session, husband, wife, group session, group of the men, and somebody says, that brother really made me mad in that meeting, and he goes and tells everybody about it. Or the wife or the husband in a marriage counseling situation, they go out and they start telling people what their husband is doing. And you are working with a counselor trying to come to a solution, then business gets told everywhere. The principle in Matthew 18:15 is telling someone between them alone, okay, I'm in a meeting. Somebody said something in the meeting they should not have said. And they go out and somebody else goes out and says, guess what so-and-so said in the men's meeting today? Well, if you have a problem with what brother so-and-so said in the men's meeting, Jesus is teaching to go talk to this person. Or you may need to bring it back to the group. What are we stopping here? We're stopping gossip. We're stopping misinformation, because a lot of times when something is said from somebody to somebody, time it gets to the fourth or fifth person, it's not even what was said. And then somebody can get a bad reputation. We need to have a rule. Are we going to keep some confidentiality? And there's several of them lumped here together, like number 12. Do we want to have a rule of confidentiality? What we say here stays here. Now, some things may not have to stay in the meeting, but if the group has decided this doesn't need to go anywhere, or again, in marriage counseling, it's none of anybody else's business, Don't even go home and tell the children what's going on. If you're trying to settle your issues, what you say in that meeting stays. Now, you can talk to your husband or wife about it, but don't be talking to other people. I have a rule. If I do a husband and wife counseling session, I don't go telling other people what we talked about. Matter of fact, I take my notes and I lock them in a drawer so nobody can see those notes, or they're in a protected file in my computer. That information is private, and it stops gossip and misunderstood information. Number 13, will I take care of myself, telling the group only what I trust them to keep? There may be situations where people are talking about personal matters. Well, if you don't feel like you can trust the group to understanding these rules can fit a broad spectrum of situations. They don't fit everything, but will I take care of myself? In other words, if there's something that I need to keep to myself, will I do it? Or am I going to open myself up to everybody and take a chance on them misunderstanding me, or maybe having the wrong idea about me? Will you be responsible for what you say? Or maybe keeping to yourself what you need to keep to yourself? These rules need to be studied and understood. Number 14, and this goes back to Matthew 18:15. If what I say in a group meeting, if I offend you or I hurt you, will you come tell me about it, or will you go talk to other people? Well, my husband and I had a meeting with the preacher, and that preacher hurt my feelings. Well, okay, who should you be saying that to? Or let's say that somebody says something to me in a meeting and my feelings get hurt or I'm offended. What's the thing to do? I may not need to deal with it in the group. The group may not know my feelings were hurt or that I'm offended, but I go to this person and tell them that, what you said was hurtful, and they could say whatever they say about it, but you try to work it out. But you go telling other people, the next thing you know, it's gossip, and it gives people, it can give people a wrong attitude toward others. It can cause them to judge them unfairly. So guess what? So-and-so said to so-and-so, and you wouldn't believe what they said. And I'm thinking, why are we telling the whole world about this anyway? We're trying to settle issues, or we're trying to come to conclusions. Now, so that's number 15. Number 15, if a group session is over and you realize you did not get finished with something you wanted to say or something you wanted to ask, will you bring the matter back to the group to try to work it out? Or will you get your feelings hurt and say, well, I'm just not going back to any meetings? Because sometimes you do run out of time. And that's why it's important for the leader of the group to set a timetable and work it out. And yet everybody has the rules. So they know if somebody did not get finished with something, okay, you could say, I have something I want to discuss, but I'll bring it back to the next meeting. Okay, so noted. But you're responsible for it. And bring it back to the meeting. Now, number 16, will we be humble instead of arrogant? I have had meetings where we're trying to settle an issue, and the person gets angry and they say, well, I've not done anything wrong. It's everybody else. Well, that's arrogance. When everybody knows that the person did something they should not have done, and you're trying to settle the issue, and also we can't read minds. I failed that in high school. I failed it in college. I cannot read your mind. Only God can do that. We should be humble. Matthew 5 and verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now here's a principle. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2 at verse 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 at verse 11. This is really an interesting thing. And these principles are kind of nestled in the scriptures. You may not catch them every time. But 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 11 says, for who among men knows the thoughts of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Well, in other words, my spirit, I know what I'm thinking. I don't know what you're thinking. And so if I don't know what you're thinking, I certainly can't say, well, I know what you're thinking. How can I know what you're thinking? Only by what you tell me. How can you know what I'm thinking? Only by what I tell you. Well, you should have seen his face. I can tell you right now, I have found at times that I see somebody's face and later we talk about it, they were not thinking at all what I thought they were thinking. And because I can't read minds and you can't either. And this is really important in marriage, in any situation where there's potential conflict. The only way I know how you feel or what you're thinking and vice versa is for one of us to speak. Well, I don't like the way you do this, or you're working on so that's in marriage, or maybe a project in the church. So, well, I would have gotten this done, but I needed some help. Well, did you tell anybody? No, I just figured everybody knew I needed help. Well, how can everybody know you need help unless you tell them? So, well, they just ought to know. I haven't found anybody who could read minds yet. So they can't just know. You see the importance. Learn these principles and practice them. Now, number 17, may others respond to what we say. In other words, I'd like to comment on what you said, maybe in a Bible class, or maybe in a marriage situation. Say, I'd like to make a comment on, say, what the counselor suggests. I'd like to say something about that, and whatever the comment is, and they may say, well, that won't work for me, or I'm not sure I agree with that particular approach. And then we're not talking about Bible always, it's just trying to settle issues. But will we be open, any of us in a group, if we speak, will we be open to others speaking and telling us, kind of giving a response? That's one of the ways we grow, by listening. You listen, you learn. The more you learn, the more you grow. The more you know, the more you grow. And we begin to develop a sense of trust with each other because we have an understanding of what's being said. And it's really important to be open to somebody responding to what we say. Number 18, when we ask a question in a meeting or group setting, will we be willing to tell why we want to know the answer? And because sometimes questions are not clear. So, well, they're asking a question. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, okay, so let me explain that, or I'm not really sure why you're asking that question. Now, this can fit a broad spectrum of settings, and you may go through here and say, well, I don't like that rule. I don't want to follow that rule. When we ask a question, will we be willing to tell why we want to know the answer? But the reason this rule is here is so that clarification is available. You can be clear on what's being asked. And maybe the way a person asks a question sometimes is not really clear what they're asking. So would you mind putting that in different words? Because I'm not sure I understood what you're asking or what you're saying. And you got a rule here says, yeah, or I'd really like to know why you're asking that. Maybe in a marriage situation, it's like, are you asking me that because you don't trust me? Or you don't think I love you? Or why are you asking me that question? and it can get to the bottom of issues. And you may go through here and say, well, I don't like that rule, but it's going to hinder your communication if you don't. Now, number 19, may a person decide to quit talking when they choose to? In other words, let's say a marriage counseling situation or a group setting where people are trying to help each other. So basically, that's all I want to say about it. I'm not going to say any more. Will we allow that person the right not to say anymore? So, well, I just need to think about it. I don't want to say anything else. Sometimes not saying anything else and thinking can be very beneficial. It might not be good for them to keep talking because they may feel like they're going to say something they'll regret. And it's important to know what our limits are. And it's okay if you get through talking, sure. And don't keep trying to pull something out of somebody. Because we've made a rule here, they can quit talking if they want to. And I'm going to rush through these last ones. This is going to be our session for Wednesday, May the 4th already. Wow. May the 4th. Will we attend all sessions? Now, let's say you have a group of men that meet once a month, or every 2 months, or whenever you meet. Well, you attend all the meetings, or it's a marriage counseling situation, and you make an agreement. Will you attend all the sessions? You could apply it to a Bible class. There are various ways you could apply these things. And the next part of this same question, this is number 20, will we attend all sessions? And the next part of it is, if we must be absent, will we tell the group why we were absent? It's important. It's important to me as a teacher, if a student does not come to class, that they explain it. And I got a note early today from a student who said he could not be there. And he explained it. So I didn't expect him to. And depending on the situation, let's say it's a group of the men and you got something really important to talk about. And one brother says, well, I cannot be there Sunday. I'm sorry. Well, do you mind telling us why? And, it could be a valid reason. Say, well, if it's not a valid reason, could you put that off? Because we have some things we really want to talk about. Could you put it off until later? And especially in the marriage counseling, keep both parties coming and make sure they agree. I think another thing is to let people know if you're not going to come. Let's say that there's a regular meeting for counseling or a group session or the men meeting of the church. So I'm not going to be able to make it this Sunday. I'm going to be out of town, or I've got to do something very important, or whatever. Or, okay, if it's a husband and wife meeting, okay, if both can't come, you probably need to establish a rule. If I'm going to do counseling with you, both of you need to be there. And if one of you can't come, then it's my rule. Say, okay, we're not going to meet till both of you can come. You work that out. Now, while in number 22, while in the discussion and exploration of new ideas, this could be the group of the men meeting of the church, or even the whole church, depending on what you're trying to get done. Talk more about that later. In a discussion of the exploration of new ideas, will the group allow any title, position, seniority, family relationship, age, actual or perceived net worth, chain of command, level of management inhibit or repress any comment? In other words, well, I don't feel qualified to speak on this. Somebody says, well, if it's something important, then speak up. I have gotten some really good ideas from some young, inexperienced people at times, usually more wisdom from the older, In other words, we're not going to allow age or family relationships or uh, you know, levels, chain of command, as it were, prevent something from seriously being considered. It should not matter who makes a suggestion in a meeting if it's a good suggestion. There could be a situation, for example, where you have a husband and wife that are having marital problems, and you may want to bring the children in for a session. Well, one of the children may say, well, I think if we tried this, if you all tried this, it would really be helpful. And it could be a really good idea. Well, you're a child, what do you know? Well, sometimes children are not as unperceptive as you might think. They sit on the sidelines watching. Sometimes new Christians in a men's meeting may see some things that people have been members of the church for a long time might not see. It shouldn't matter who has the idea if the idea is good and helpful. That's the point for number 22. Number 23, are we aware that some of these rules will probably be broken? What will we learn about ourselves and leadership when they are broken? Number one, by us. What we learn by others. We are human. And we're probably going to break the rules sometimes. I think we could add to this, are we willing to try and keep these rules? And you're going to sign the paper when you get done with it. That way everybody agreed. Number 24, it's our last one. Will we agree to try to apply these biblical principles to ourselves before we try to fix others? In other words, am I going to apply these principles to Roger first? No matter if I'm the leader or if I'm just a part of a group, will I agree that I'm going to apply these rules to myself just as much as anybody else? And one text I want to look at, and there's several scriptures here that you can go and look at, but I think I want to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 27 first. 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 27. Which says, Paul says, but I discipline my body. I take responsibility for my body, and I make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Paul says, I'm going to take responsibility for myself so that I don't, somebody says, well, why are you preaching to us? You're doing the same thing. So are you going to keep the rules? 2 Corinthians 13:5 is to try yourselves or test yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. See if you're being faithful to God. There are principles here. And the main thing is, are we going to apply these rules to ourselves first before we say, well, so-and-so broke the rules? Well, are you keeping the rules? And if so-and-so breaks the rules, are you going to go talk to them, or are you going to talk to everybody else? That's a part of confidentiality and settling issues. These rules are designed to be studied and understood, and I believe that you will find them helpful in your group settings, if it's in marriage, if it's a group of the men meeting, if it's a group of a half dozen church members. It could be the whole church trying to settle an issue. If you have rules and guidelines, it gives you something to go by, and everybody's trying to work together to accomplish what is good in the eyes of God for trying to make a situation better, to come up with a new idea, to fix a problem. Many ways these can be applied. And these principles, I want to thank Brother Jerrie Barber for presenting these some time ago, and I've gone through his courses on it. If you have questions, gentlemen, please email me, or you can bring them up in the next class that I meet. Brother Mike Hickson will be doing the class, Lord willing, either this coming Wednesday or the next, I may have another session before he teaches. Let us pray. Father, thank you for giving us your word, for giving us guidelines for our lives. May we seek biblical principles and apply them in everything that we do and everything that we say. Let us be together and try to help each other and not hurt one another, and accomplish great things in our homes and in the church, so that we may be strong for you and be the light of the world. In Christ I pray, and amen.